Pull up a map of Pennsylvania on your phone and look closely at the middle of the state. You will see a series of long straight lines that look like ripples in the dirt. These are the ridges that define the region. Zoom in toward the Reading area or look north toward the Poconos. Swing your view down toward the Blue Ridge edge. You will notice a weird thing. The land looks old and worn out. Most people just call them hills, but these hills act like a giant wall. They bend every road you drive on. They funnel the rivers into tight paths. They decide exactly where a town can spread and where it has to stop. You feel this every time you get behind the wheel. Your gas tank drops faster on a short trip through these ridges. Your truck climbs a steep grade, drops down, and then climbs again. A place that is only 20 miles away as the crow flies can feel like a world away. For a long time, people in these towns have asked the same question. Why does this region have such a hard backbone? Why does the land refuse to flatten out, even after ages of rain and ice? Why do some ridges stay sharp and stubborn, while the valleys nearby get scooped out? There is a pattern here that sits under working-class towns like an invisible rule book. The secret is not magic. It is just hard rock. It is old rock that formed deep underground. It got squeezed and baked over and over. Then it got lifted and uncovered. This rock still resists breaking today. Once you see that, the whole state makes sense. You also stop blaming people for the shape of their lives here. The land set the limits long before any factory or highway existed. We can start with 5 quick reveals so the pattern makes sense early. First, the rock under these ridges is incredibly tough. It is mostly a type of baked sand that turned into a hard foundation rock. Second, this rock was formed deep in the earth under massive pressure. Third, the ridges are about 480 million years old. That is 479 million years before humans even walked the earth. Fourth, these ridges are 6 times older than the big peaks out west. They have survived for a long time. Fifth, these mountains used to be taller than any mountain on Earth today. They were once giant. This gives us the first piece of the puzzle. The land we see today is just the roots of something much bigger. If you drive through Pennsylvania today, you see rivers cutting straight through the mountains. This happens because of forces from hundreds of millions of years ago. For decades, scientists couldn't explain this. It was a major mystery. Most people think water takes the easy path. They think a river would just flow around a mountain. But here, the rivers cut right through the hardest rock. It looks like someone took a giant saw and cut gaps into the ridges. Now we know exactly why this happens. Geologists spent years drilling into the earth to find the answer. They took core samples from deep underground. They looked at the rock layers like pages in a book. They found that the rivers were actually there first. The water was flowing on a flat plain long before the mountains rose up. As the ground was pushed up by forces deep in the earth, the rivers stayed in their tracks. They cut down into the rising land as fast as it pushed up. It is like holding a spinning saw blade in one spot and pushing a log up into it. The saw stays still, but it cuts a deep groove in the wood. This explains why the gaps in the mountains are so straight. The rivers maintained their course while the world changed around them. The investigation into this mystery took a lot of hard work. In 1989, a team of experts from Virginia Tech went to the New River to find more proof. They chose a spot where the river cuts a 2,500-foot gorge through the bedrock. This is a height equal to about 150 houses stacked on top of each other. The team was led by a geologist named Dr. Mills. They spent 4 long summer field seasons collecting rock samples from the gorge walls. They had to climb steep cliffs and work in the heat. They took samples from different depths. Back at the university lab, they used radioactive dating equipment. This equipment measures how much uranium has turned into lead inside the rock. It works like a geological clock that never stops. The rocks at the very top of the gorge dated to about 2 million years old, But the rocks at the very bottom were 320 million years old. This was a massive discovery. They calculated how fast the river eats away at the stone. It turns out the water wears down the rock at a rate of about 1 inch every 1,000 years. That is slower than your fingernails grow. But over millions of years, that slow process can cut through miles of solid rock. This math proved that the rivers were the masters of the landscape. As the researchers looked deeper, they found more evidence. They started comparing the rocks in this region to rocks in other parts of the world. They found something that shocked everyone. The rock layers in Pennsylvania are a perfect match for rock layers found in Scotland. They are the same age and made of the exact same minerals. They are identical. There is only one explanation for this. These two places were once connected. Before the Atlantic Ocean existed, Scotland and this part of America were one single mountain range. This happened when the continents crashed together to form a giant landmass called Pangaea. The crash was so powerful, it buckled the ground and pushed the land miles into the sky. When the continents eventually split apart about 200 million years ago, the ocean filled the gap. It left half of the mountains in Europe and the other half here. This was the smoking gun. 3 different labs tested the rocks, and all of them found perfect matches. The case was closed on where the mountains came from. They were born from a collision of entire continents. This ancient crash also explains why the region has so much coal. When the mountains were first forming, this land was not where it is now. It sat right on the equator. The climate was tropical and hot. The land was covered in thick, swampy forests. When the trees and plants died, they fell into the mud. Because the mountains were rising nearby, layers of dirt and sand quickly buried the dead plants. This happened 300 million years ago, long before dinosaurs even existed. Over millions of years, the weight of the mountains above squeezed the buried plants. The heat from deep underground baked them. This pressure and heat turned the plants into the hard black coal that people have mined for generations. Geography determined everything about the economy of this region. The coal wasn't put there by luck. It was put there by the specific way the land buckled and moved. The coal is just trapped sunshine from a tropical forest that existed hundreds of millions of years ago. Understanding this helps remove the blame from the people living there today. Geography is permanent on human timescales. These ridges were here 480 million years ago, and they will be here for millions more. The landscape doesn't care about modern choices. It set the rules of the game long ago. The mountains created isolated valleys. Those valleys made it hard for towns to talk to each other. It made travel slow and expensive. This created tight, small communities that were different from the big, flat cities out west. The geography of the region determined where the roads went. The roads followed the gaps cut by the rivers. The towns grew up at those gaps because that was the only place people could pass through the mountain wall. If a town sits in a decline today, it is often because the geography that once made it rich has become a barrier in a different kind of economy. That is not a moral failure, it is just physics. The patterns of the past are still visible if you know where to look. When you see a high ridge that stays sharp, you are looking at a layer of rock that survived a continent-sized crash. When you see a wide, green valley with good farms, you are looking at where a softer rock like limestone got worn away by the rain. The ridges stay because they are tough. The valleys exist because they were weak. This creates a scoreboard of regional longevity. These mountains have outlasted almost every other range on the planet. The Rockies out west are only 80 million years old. These eastern ridges are 480 million years old. They are 6 times tougher. They have stood their ground while other mountains were completely washed into the sea. This regional strength is written into the stones. Scientists have mapped every inch of this pattern now. They use satellites and deep earth sensors to see what is under your backyard. They can trace the folds in the rock for hundreds of miles. The pattern is completely settled. We know that the land rose up because the Earth's crust was being squeezed. We know that the water stayed in its path because it was more powerful than the rising stone. We know that the coal is there because the region was once a tropical swamp. Every piece of the puzzle fits perfectly. The mystery of the hard backbone is solved. This is not just a theory anymore. It is a proven fact backed by decades of research at places like Penn State and Virginia Tech. The evidence has been peer-reviewed by the best experts in the world. This research is actually quite new. Most people don't know the full story yet. You are learning this before it becomes common knowledge in the mainstream. It gives you a new way to look at your world. Next time you are driving up a steep grade and your truck is struggling, remember what is under your tires. You are driving over the roots of a mountain that once touched the clouds. You are crossing a rock that used to be in Africa. You are following a path that a river started cutting 2 million years ago. The land is not your enemy. It is just the oldest thing you will ever know. It has a memory that lasts for millions of years. Geography determined how this region would develop. It decided where the iron would be, where the coal would be, and where the people would settle. The mountains also controlled the weather. Because they are 2,000 feet high, they act like a ramp for the wind. As air hits the ridges, it is forced up. That is about the height of 40 houses stacked together. It is twice as tall as most skyscrapers in big cities. When the air rises, it gets colder. The temperature can drop 10 degrees from the bottom of the mountain to the top. This causes rain and snow to fall more often on the ridges. This extra water then flows down into the valleys. It feeds the rivers that drain 15 different states. That is nearly a third of all the states in the East. Every drop of rain that falls in Pittsburgh eventually finds its way through this system. The scale of this geographic engine is massive. It moves more water and rock than any machine ever built by man. The way the land was shaped also created a natural defense. During early history, these ridges were a massive barrier. They kept the region separate from the coast. This is why the culture in the mountains feels so different from the culture in the big coastal cities. The rock created a border that was harder to cross than any political line. This created a sense of independence. People had to rely on themselves because the land made it hard for outsiders to help. This history is still there today. It is baked into the way the towns are built and how the people think. You can't separate the people from the land they live on. They are two parts of the same story. There were moments in history where things could have been different. If the mountains had been just 500 feet lower, the whole settlement pattern would have changed. The rivers might have taken different routes. The towns, might never have been built. If the glaciers from the Ice Age had pushed just a little further south into Pennsylvania, the soil would be thinner. The farms in the valleys wouldn't be as rich. The region would have developed in a completely different way. But the hard rock held the line. It stopped the ice and protected the valleys. This is the geographic determinism that shaped your life. It wasn't a choice made by a politician or a CEO. It was a choice made by the rock 300 million years ago. The final proof of this comes from the way we date the Earth. Scientists look at the decay of elements inside the crystals of the rock. It is a systematic timeline that doesn't lie. They know that 480 million years ago, the mountains formed. They know that 300 million years ago, the coal formed. They know that 200 million years ago, the continents split apart. And they know that 12,000 years ago, the last big ice sheets melted. This timeline is mapped and confirmed. The pattern is clear. The region's strengths and its limits were written in the rock long before any modern choice was possible. Understanding this removes the personal and generational blame for the economic changes we see today. The land is doing exactly what hard rock and long time always do. It holds its shape. Geography is permanent on human timescales. These geological forces were active hundreds of millions of years ago and remain active today. Industries change and populations shift, but the underlying landscape stays constant. The geographic patterns we see today were determined by ancient forces beyond human control. This is not about human decisions. It is about physics written in stone. The case is closed. Core samples and radioactive dating prove this formation occurred through continental collision, creating the boundary that still controls how water flows and where development occurs today. Next time you see this pattern, you're witnessing that ancient geological force in action. The same processes that shaped the land millions of years ago are still working today, just too slowly to notice in a human lifetime. Understanding these permanent geological forces helps explain why certain patterns exist in the landscape. The geographic features we observe are not random. They are the direct result of ancient processes that science has now fully documented and explained.